Hi everyone, Patricia Worby, Alchemy Therapies here, and I'm delighted to invite with me today to have a conversation is Carole Randell, who is a psychotherapist who works with people to find the why behind chronic pain. Where, as we know, there are a lot of emotional factors involved in chronic pain, and how and why the mind and the body sort of work together to create that message of chronic pain. So it's absolutely up my street, and I'm fascinated to find out how Carole does it differently from me, and you know, how we work with the mind body, because it's such an important understanding, isn't it, Carole, that these two things aren't separate. So do you want to tell me a little bit about, well, first of all, how did you get involved in doing this work?
Well, actually, I for many years struggled with fibromyalgia and ME, and it was really through that I became very involved about the mind body connection. For me, it was a very emotional journey based on a very dysfunctional childhood. And what I hadn't really appreciated was how all those things that had happened to me had really impacted, because actually when we're going through them, they become our norm, don't they? And, you know, we don't see that, well, we really dampen things down because actually we can't perhaps deal with what's going on at the time. So we disregard, we try and move on because it's painful, all those sorts of things really. So that's how I became more interested in training as a psychotherapist, to see where this mind-body connection was.
Okay, so it was your own personal experience really, which is a bit like me, trying to find answers in a system that doesn't really work this way. You know, the current medical system looks at the mind as being psychological, and therefore you need a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and the body, you know, yes, you can go to the doctor and you can get various tests, but the way that they interact is not considered. So I mean, you mentioned your childhood was not happy. We don't need to go into the whys and wherefores unless you want to, but how do you think that impacted you then as an adult?
Oh, absolutely, hugely. I mean, it shaped who I was, to the point actually I didn't know who I was at all, which was, you know, very interesting. Just to give you a bit of a background, I grew up in an alcoholic household, a lot of, you know, mental illness associated with that, a lot of dysfunctional family issues around that. And so I didn't ever have the opportunity to find out who I was as a person, because I had to be very responsible from a very early age. So that's where it gets complicated, because if you're not encouraged and you don't have those attachments, and you don't have that love and care that so many people take for granted, then actually you're not able to do that either for yourself, first of all, or to give to other people. And I can remember making a very conscious decision at the age of 13 that nobody was going to upset me ever again. And that was, I think, the real, you know, life thing for me.
Yeah, you've touched on so many important points there. So the idea that your attachments are insecure, that's a very important understanding, that what happens to you in childhood frames the way you perceive yourself. And you said you didn't really know who you were, because you have no reference points. If nobody tells you, wow, that was great what you just did, or aren't you clever? Or if they only just say, Carole, I need you to do this, or Carole, you're useless, or whatever those messages are, you make the decision that you're not going to let that hurt you, which is adaptive, and it's understandable as a child to survive that kind of childhood. But of course it becomes maladaptive in adulthood, doesn't it? And
absolutely.
And then you don't have a connection with yourself that says, I'm okay, actually. I can trust myself. I have this conversation with my body. I know what I'm feeling. I know when I'm off. I know what to do. You know, I didn't have any of that either. I didn't grow up with an alcoholic family. I grew up with a chronically ill father and an anxious mother. And it was like, don't upset anything. That was my message, you know, just be good the whole time. Don't feel, don't think, don't interrupt, just kind of get on. And that was my message. So over responsibility becomes perhaps something we share in common, the message that you can't allow yourself to take your own needs seriously. And of course, when that's translated into the body, that becomes a program for chronic ill health, doesn't it? I think you'd agree.
Absolutely does. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more, because actually you're not cognitive ability is so impaired that actually any message doesn't even trickle through, let alone get through.
No.
It's a very difficult thing, and so it takes a crisis for you to actually, really think, what is going on here? And it's really tricky even then. You might go through that crisis 3, 4, 5 times before you start to get the message to look at, and start to feel those feelings and make a difference.
Yeah, that was the same for me. I had one crisis, and then I sort of somehow bumbled through that, and then there was another one about 2 years later, and it's a gradual awakening, isn't it, to the fact that I think the main message for me is that, and I want to get over to our viewing audience, is that vulnerability is not the problem, it's the answer. All right, to allow yourself to feel and feel vulnerable and reach out for help, and know who to reach out to help to. Unfortunately, if you've been trained not to ask for help, you can often end up making bad decisions about who you speak to and ask for help,
absolutely.
or you just don't at all, and then you can't manage everything on your own, and this cycle of illness just sort of gets deeper and deeper and deeper embedded. So you obviously got through in some way through your own crisis of health, and here you are helping other people, and I know it's never been more needed, right? Because we're going through a societal trauma right now of this virus that's come from nowhere, although in fact we know that we've had many of these before. They've just never been so perhaps well flagged, let's say. And it's causing a lot of anxiety, isn't it, for a lot of people?
Huge.
And particularly, I should imagine, those people who are already anxious, who already have anxiety issues. So tell me a little bit about how you're approaching that with people at the moment. What are you doing?
The biggest thing that's coming through at the moment to me is about anxiety of going back to work, or what is considered to be the norm, because I think whether we like it or not, this is going to be with us for quite some time, and it's about how do you manage that, not only in a practical sense but in an emotional sense as well, and coupled with responsibility that you will have for children, work, parents, or whatever that might happen to be. You do feel quite a heightened sense of responsibility behind all of this as well, which creates another anxiety on top of these other things that will be just going around in here, and you hear all this stuff on the news, and it's contradictory at the moment as well. Am I going back to work? Oh, that one says yes I am. Oh, I look at the other side, that one says I'm not, and I think that in itself creates a huge anxiety, that unknown, uncertainty.
Uncertainty, one of the human needs, 6 human needs. And it's just not there at the moment. We don't have the answers. No. Even the scientists don't have the answers. The people we normally look to give us, governments, scientific establishment are all disagreeing with each other. We've just had the head of one of the main players in the SAGE committee has resigned, because he didn't follow his own advice. And so that does undermine, I think, faith in other people to know the answer when we don't. And I think the greatest trauma we've gone through right now, certainly in the initial stages, was we looked around for other people to kind of stabilize us and make us feel safe again, and everyone was panicking. You could go to the supermarket and people were just piling stuff into massive trolleys, or they were looking really, really afraid. And I know that's gone down a lot recently, and we're moving into a new phase of perhaps returning to work and how that's going to happen. But as you say, things are never going to be normal. There's a new normal, and obviously social distancing will be with us a while. So how do you sort of allay those fears that people have? What is it you encourage them to do, for instance, to help deal with their anxiety?
Yeah, I think the first thing is just to remember to breathe. You know, I mean, that breath is such an intrinsic part of who we are, but that's not something we really focus on. You know, it's so autonomic, isn't it? But actually, if you just check in with yourself, first of all, you know, how am I breathing? Is it very shallow? You know, if I took a few deep breaths, does that make me feel any different? So it's just being in that sort of brief moment of time, if you like, just to do a quick check-in. And, as you know, talk about what you're feeling. Like you mentioned earlier about that vulnerability. Well, actually start off by, you know, talking about to your friends or to whoever about how you're feeling, and you will be really surprised. There'll be so much feedback from people saying, I was thinking that, you know, yeah, what do we do now, sort of thing. Yeah, so I think, you know, just being open, keep talking, just doing that breath, and if you've got some sort of bigger concerns that you're not sure about who to speak to, write it down in a journal. You don't have to show anybody. And those are just some very basic, easy principles that I live by myself. So, yeah.
Yeah, so you're walking your talk, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is great. I mean, and that's what I think's been missing from the government approach in the UK, at least. New Zealand has a much better approach, I think, in the sense that their Prime Minister has led by example rather than telling us what we should be doing and then doing the opposite. And I'm not wishing to get political on this particular video, but it's very clear that people model behaviour, do they not? And if your leaders are calm and collected and at least have a plan, like you said, we need a bit of certainty. It seems like the outcomes are a lot better for people than this sort of, oh, we'll try this and then we'll try this and oops, that's not working. But yeah, the reminder to be in the body, I think, is so important, and just a moment to slow down, and let's do that now.
Yes, exactly.
Just
Just take a
breathe.
nice, just breathe. Yeah.
Just breathe.
I think one thing, this is a reflection and my own personal opinion, but I think, I mean, we've talked about the nanny state and how we've been managed before, and all these sort of little advertisements we used to get about, you know, do this, do that, do the other, that all suddenly went. So we were sort of left a bit bereft. So I think there's a grief here as well, and endings that, you know, have come around for people as well. So that is anxiety making as well, because whereas we were being quite directed by government and infomercials and all the rest of it, suddenly it's like having the rug pulled from under your feet.
Yeah. So being led and then that finishing means we're all in a state of uncertainty. We don't know what's coming. When we know something's coming because we've been told we're going to have some more information, but we don't know what the outcome is, and that's a very difficult thing for people to plan for, because what your brain loves to do is to pattern match. It loves to understand what is coming and be able to go, oh, I know how we deal with that. I'll just go back to these examples. Now, actually, you were talking about adverse childhood experience, although we didn't call it that. That's the term, isn't it, for the kind of childhood you had and the kind of childhood I had, or ACE for short. And actually, that's a form of patterning. And what the brain does there is it goes back to the past examples. You know, what do I do when trouble strikes? I know I don't feel. In your case,
absolutely, yes.
I know. I cut that part of me off, and I just carry on and carry on and carry on, and that's certainly what I did. Or in a different sort of childhood, I know I cling to that person that I need, even though they're not good for me, and even though they abuse me, because that's what I learned in my childhood. I mean, there are so many different patterns that come in from those kinds of experiences. And I know a lot of people say, how can it still affect you? That, you know, so far ahead in your life, you know, it's a long time ago. Surely you've moved beyond that now, haven't you? What would be your answer to that?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because Elaine Wilkins at the Chrysalis Effect, where, you know, we do a lot of our work with clients there, she likens it to peeling an onion, and you can only take a bit at a time, you know. And I think that's what I would say, that's around trauma, particularly from, your childhood. You can only deal with what you can at the time, and you will get triggers, but you won't recognize those triggers until you start to delve into it. But you can only do it a bit at a time. It's just too overwhelming, to be honest, to really think and go back into it. So I mean, I'm going to put my cards on the table here. I'm 60 in July. It's taken me this long to get to where I am and have the understanding that I've got, and I've done a huge amount of work over 10 years on learning about this stuff. And clients that come to me, they just know they feel horrible, they feel icky, but they can't really explain what it is. They've got no words for it. And I think and also it becomes overwhelming again for them to have to suddenly think, I've got to start dealing with this,
Yeah, it's so important to know that these things don't announce themselves in obvious ways. The triggers are not like, oh, it's my childhood. In fact, you won't know. All you know is you feel off, or you feel wrong, or you feel anxious for no reason, or angry for no reason, or shut down, which is another reaction where you just go blank and dissociate. But what you said was they feel horrible and they don't know why. They're just noticing that things in their current life aren't working out, all right? Because adverse childhood experience affects everything, doesn't it? It affects the way your brain configures itself. So because it's plastic and it's adaptive, it's going to look for threat much more readily, for instance, and it's going to see difficulties with relationships and with trusting people for those reasons. It's going to choose jobs and careers based on these ideas it has about itself. So you may end up in the wrong job, doing something that your parents thought was a good idea, or something that you have trained yourself to be okay with, but actually you hate. And that's going to be so interesting, isn't it, when we come out of this period of people working just automatically thinking, oh, this is my job, I have no choice. And now maybe for some people it'll be a wake-up call to think, actually, do I really want to be doing this with my life? And that's another aspect, isn't it, that could actually provoke a new dialogue between mind and body for many people.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So let's hope that there is a positivity that comes from this. And I've been talking about this a lot on my YouTube channel. Just the positives are there. We just have to focus on them and not so much on the negatives, because we're being blasted with negatives, aren't we, every day? More deaths, more fear, more worry. So you mentioned no words for the way they feel. So is that why you've chosen to use a sort of a bodily based approach, getting them into their bodies rather than asking them, well, what happened? Tell me all about it.
Yeah. I find in my earlier work, when I was just a straightforward therapist, so I just sat there listening, or I asked them to go back into the trauma or drama, that it was really, they were going back into it as traumatizing that person. So what I do now with them, I get them to do a timeline. So they're very clear in their own mind. Obviously, I've got a visual on that. But I don't ask them to go into it as such. I just say, right, you know what happened, you know how you felt. So it's about, if you're there, how are you feeling about it, and whereabouts in your body is it light, is it dark, has it a shape? So using all of those sort of somatic type techniques to get a feeling. So it's coming from out of here, and they're taking it in as a feeling, so they can actually start to open up a bit. And it just starts very gradually. We don't dive straight into something, it will be about, you're sitting at the moment, feel the chair under your feet, and you can see with people when it's starting to really affect them, and you can bring them back and say to them, breathe. You can say, feel the chair underneath you, or where, whatever you're sitting, or hold a pen, just something to ground them back again into the present, rather than going back to re-traumatize them in the past. So yeah.
Brilliant. So I had a conversation this morning, funnily enough, with another therapist, just a friend of mine, who was saying that the clients are often afraid that you're going to get them to go back and to relive and to there is a term for that, which you'll know, of course, desensitization, where you just go over and over and over and over until supposedly the theory says you're no longer triggered by it. Well, that might work with fear of spiders, maybe. All right. But with trauma, because trauma is ever present and it's in the body, I think that's a really poor treatment. And what you're describing is similar to how I work. You know, in the body, you get them to ground, you get them to feel it in safety, of course, because you're working with them and they feel that you're the safety for them at this point in time. And then as they allow that, they can actually find safety within their bodies. So it's such a beautiful way of dealing with the past, isn't it? And it's so quick compared to talk therapy.
Yeah, absolutely is quick. You know, I mean, I can see people start to turn around in about 3 sessions, and you know, they will go out with a smile on their face, whereas when they came to me, they'd got no connection to themselves whatsoever. You know, they're dead behind the eyes. You know, it's really interesting to see just, you know, that just even a slight change, how it can make them feel so much better about themselves.
Yeah, and of course that has ramifications for them, but it also has ramifications for the people that they care about and the people that they live with and the people they're in relationship with. And so it's like ripples on a pond. I think we're using lots of metaphors today with the onions and but I use these metaphors all the time because metaphors are pictorial, and as you said, there are no words to explain, and we often imagine things in terms of sensation, don't we? Shapes, textures, colors. And so I think it's in a way it's like the ripples on a pond. When we make a change with one person, it ramifies, it unfolds. And I don't want to get into quantum physics here, but there's so much we could talk about. There's so much we could say about the energy of a person shifting. You said you can see it in them when they arrive and when they leave, and we're very aware of that, aren't we? Because we're attuned to them. Because we know what we're looking for, don't we?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you know when someone's made a shift?
It's not only we know what we're looking for. We have been there, so that's actually true. We know those feelings, and we've lived through a lot of this stuff. So we're quite empathetic to where they are at that moment. And although we don't know, because we're obviously everybody's an individual, and we can't know what that other person is really thinking and feeling, we do know what it's like to have felt those types of feelings, and I think that's the big thing. And I just think that's what I get so much joy out of this work with, you know, and I'm really passionate about it because having been there myself, solo, having, you know, lived through this stuff, and knowing that actually you can get through it if you find the right person and you gel. And don't get me wrong, I don't gel with every client, so in which case I would refer them on, because this is about the client. It's not about what I can do and I can work with, because although I've got those tools in my toolbox, the personality might not work with that person. So it's also, as a practitioner, recognizing that point when actually you're not serving that client. So, you know,
it's really important. And I heard of a story this week of one of my clients saying that the last person she consulted recommended daily analysis.
Wow. And
I said, that's a great business model for your therapist, all right? It's not so great for you. That shouldn't be necessary. The way we work, as you say, 3 to 6 sessions, you start to make a big difference in people. And I can tell, you know, you're intuitive, and I know I'm the same. And yes, of course, we're empathizing with their situation, because we know what it feels like to feel so derailed by your feelings that you really can't handle them. And I think what we both provide in different ways is a sense of release for people, where they're safe to feel what they feel.
Mm.
You know, feelings are just meant to be felt. They're meant to be processed and allowed through. And unfortunately, our culture at the moment says, don't feel, it's not allowed. We can't allow you to, you know, be overwhelmed. And that's where anxiety, of course, creeps in, because the body is trying to tell you there's something down here. Hello, something down here that needs feeling. And you're going, no, I can't. I just have to keep going. I just have to keep going. And that's, I believe, what drives anxiety. So, Carole, you do amazing work. I know you do. You know, and the world is a richer place to have you in it. How can people get hold of you if they want to work with you? Can you give me
well, there's like 3 ways you could do it. You could go to my website, which is chronicpainreliefonline.clinic. I'm also an accredited practitioner with the chrysalis effect, which I work with fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue clients. And also I'm a SERPA trained practitioner, which works with people with chronic pain.
So that's SERPA, SERPA, isn't it?
Yeah,
I can't remember what it stands for.
SIRPA.
Oh, SIRPA. There you go. I got it wrong. Okay, so they can look that up, find you there, or they can go to the chrysalis effect, or they can find you on your website, which I will put the link below as well. So
or Carole, CAROLE, Randell, RANDELL @gmail.com.
Perfect. Well, it's been a pleasure, absolute pleasure as usual, talking to you. And it's so needed. This work is so needed, particularly at this time. I hope we don't see a surge in anxiety, but I fear we will, particularly as lockdown is phased and we come into, you know, a new normal. But we all have to take heart, don't we? And trust that we'll get each other through this. And if we need to reach out, reach out. Don't feel you're alone in this, because all of us, to some extent, are uncertain right now, and it's normal and it's natural. So great talking with you.
Thank you.
And
it's been great.
And I'm going to say goodbye and talk soon.
And you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And subscribe.